Ah, Snow White, a timeless fairy tale that has been adapted, twisted, and reimagined more times than we can count. Of course, its most famous adaptation remains Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937, the first ever animated feature film. But no, Disney couldn't just let it rest. A live-action remake had to happen. When the news broke, some were curious, while others questioned whether we really needed yet another live-action remake. Sigh, another film to add to the pile, given the recent trend of forced diversity and questionable, creative choices. We braced ourselves for the inevitable butchering of yet another beloved classic. Sure, in a fantasy world, anything is possible. But when you take an already existing story, slap the live-action label on it, and call it a reimagining, without actually creating something new, that's where the problem lies. The brothers. Grimm version of Snow White is, like most of their tales, dark and cautionary. Snow White herself is a passive protagonist, whose defining trait is her beauty. She's too innocent, too trusting, and ultimately too helpless. Let's be real. She spends most of the story either being tricked or being saved. And honestly, I wouldn't go out of my way to read a book or watch a movie about a character that passive. So, I get it. Then came Disney's animated adaptation, where Snow White is sweet. She sings to animals, and that's about it. She doesn't grow, she doesn't change, she doesn't even question her circumstances. The dwarfs have more personality than she does, and that's just sad. As for the prince, he sings, he kisses, and he whisks her away. That's it. No character depth, no struggles, just a handsome guy who conveniently shows up at the right time. Let's be real. The only truly interesting character in the story is the evil queen. She's ruthless, vain, and actually does things to get what she wants. Her transformation into the old hag is iconic, and she even gets a dramatic, memorable death. Meanwhile, Snow White, she literally sleeps through the climax. Honestly, as a child, I watched the animated film maybe once. I read the Brothers Grimm version once, and that was enough. There just wasn't much to the story to hook me in. I can understand why Disney wanted to give more personality to the characters in a live-action remake of Snow White. That would be the logical approach, right? Snow White could remain sweet and innocent, but with more depth. The prince could have more screen time and, for once, an actual personality. The dwarfs? They could have a compelling backstory that makes them more than just comedic side characters. But that's what a reasonable person would expect, not the creators behind whatever Snow White 2025 turned out to be. The only version of Snow White I distinctly remember is the one where the queen wished for a daughter, with skin as white as snow, hair as dark as ebony, and lips as red as blood. That wasn't even in the 1937 adaptation. So when I look at Rachel Zegler in this role, I can't help but think, nope, maybe she's a talented actress. I don't care about any off-screen controversies. That's irrelevant to the role itself. But we start with a Snow White who doesn't look like Snow White. And then we move on to the writing. I don't know who thought this script was a good idea. Sure, we know Mark Webb directed it, but storytelling isn't just about slapping strong female lead onto a character and calling it a day. Strength doesn't mean creating a Mary Sue who steamrolls through the plot with zero struggle. Did the 1937 adaptation need fixing? Absolutely. As I said, characters needed more depth. Actors needed to bring those characters to life. What we got instead was a bizarre, uninspired mess. No dwarfs, just CGI abominations. A Snow White who isn't Snow White in any way that matters. A prince who isn't a prince. An evil queen who looked the part, but failed to deliver. No surprise, Disney's Snow White 2025 flopped. Critics weren't kind. The Guardian called it an exhaustingly awful reboot, slamming its tiresome pseudo-progressive additions and lackluster performances from Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot. The Atlantic pointed out the film's shallow changes and excessive CGI, which created a lifeless, unengaging experience. But you've heard all the gossip already. Everyone's talking about it. And I'm not here to scream, "Don't watch it." Because, honestly, I've sat through plenty of Disney's live-action remakes, even the ones people swore weren't worth my time. It's just that I expected more. If you're going to remake a classic, at least do it right. I want an Ariel, with recognizably red hair, so I instantly know it's her. Not a CGI horror show of underwater creatures haunting my dreams. I didn't need a live-action Lion King, but if you're going to do it, make it matter. Disney can remake whatever they want. They can adapt stories however they please. But it's a shame, really. They have the resources, the talent, the legacy, and yet, what do they create? Not something extraordinary. Not something that makes people rush to theaters filled with nostalgia and excitement. Not something that reminds us why we fell in love with these stories in the first place. Imagine a Snow White that stayed true to its essence while elevating the character. A version where she remains Snow White, but is given a real personality, where even adults could watch and say, "That's a well-written character." Instead, we got this. Not the worst thing ever, but just another film. Decent songs, bad acting, unsettling CGI. Well done, Disney. Well done.